Hi everyone, I'm your host, Lee-Davies. I'm a filmmaker, entrepreneur, conservationist, and impact investor. And welcome to our Future Nature podcast. We aim to empower you with the insights and knowledge to navigate the increasingly complex landscape of tomorrow. So brace yourselves as we go on an exhilarating podcast adventure and dive deep into what it truly means to be human in the 21st century. We'll explore the critical issues of climate change, artificial intelligence, biohacking, and longevity, as well as other emerging threats to humanity. And we'll be interviewing the leading change makers, thought leaders, and entrepreneurs from around the world. Welcome to Our Future Nature. Let's get on with today's episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to Our Future Nature. Today, I'm really honored to be speaking to Melissa Garvey, Global Director of Ocean Protection at the Nature Conservancy. Melissa is an experienced conservation leader and has careers taken her around the world to address some of the most pressing challenges for people and nature. Melissa currently leads the Nature Conservancy's Global Marine Protection and Restoration Program. I'm really excited to have her here today to speak about the beauty of the oceans and the Nature Conservancy's goal to protect 10% of our oceans by 2030. Welcome, Melissa. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Sean. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here.
And where are you dialing in from?
So I'm actually on work travel today. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area near our world office. I'm normally based in the mountains in Colorado, though, which is a little far from the ocean, but it's a wonderful place to be.
Is that Colorado Boulder?
I'm in the Boulder area, correct. Up in the mountains outside of Boulder. It's a good place to be.
What a beautiful place to live.
Yeah.
Well, just coincidentally, were you affected by the wildfires recently or anything in the last season?
And not directly. I do live in a fire-prone area, and so I'm fortunate to be up in the mountains, surrounded by forests. So it's something that we live with on a daily basis. But the broader community was impacted pretty greatly, but I individually was not. So. I'm appreciative of that and supportive of those in the community, though.
Well, today we're here to talk mostly about the oceans. So tell us a little bit about your career, your background, and why you got into ocean conservation.
Sure. Sean, this is when you need to put on a seatbelt, because I don't have sort of this, you hear a lot of people in ocean conservation who grew up right by the ocean, and it's what they knew that they wanted to do from the time that they were a child. And I have to say, I have a very unusual background for someone working in this space. What you may not have noted in my bio is I started my career as a securities and antitrust attorney. So very, very different from what I'm doing today. I was always a very outdoorsy person, loved nature, but, I was so much attracted to these big sort of innovative, hard problems of our time that I thought I could address by practicing law. And what I learned very quickly was I absolutely loved the complexity of law. I loved the systems thinking. And at the end of the day, I just didn't feel the passion for what seemed to be helping people fight over money. And I was then eventually able to just make a really hard switch. And I found my true calling working in conservation, and haven't looked back since. I've been working both in land conservation as well as in marine conservation for now over 18 years. And I've been dedicated solely to ocean work for about the past 5. And I think I certainly found probably what I would call the world's largest challenges, and that's trying to address whether it's climate change or impacts of humans, in fisheries. Protecting our oceans is really something that benefits all of us. And the challenges are really, from my perspective, it's some of the greatest challenges that we as a species face and that our planet faces. And so I've been thrilled to take the, innovative thinking, systems thinking, the creativity, and to be able to really drive that into making a change for oceans.
And of course, you've probably picked the hardest problem to crack, right? I mean, solving the issues around the oceans and ocean health is probably some of the most complex issues that one could face. Everything from monitoring to international law, sea treaties, all these kinds of issues, obviously microplastics, global warming, marine biodiversity. Is there any particular field within that ocean conservation matrix that you're particularly drawn to?
Sure. So the work that I'm focused on at this point is really large-scale ocean conservation and ensuring that there's durable financing for that, for the protections, as well as ensuring that we're focused on the critical ecosystems that are so important for ocean health, whether that's coral reefs or mangroves. And really bringing those things together is what I get to do on a daily basis. I sometimes feel like I'm the most fortunate person in the world to be able to tackle these challenges with my incredible team that's got the expertise to really try and move the needle on these big challenges that we have in front of us. I mentioned that I live in Colorado, which a lot of people think might be a strange place to work on oceans, and it sort of is, let me be honest. But the reality is that no matter where we are, oceans make our lives better, whether it's providing, 50% of the oxygen we breathe, or, food and livelihoods for, billions of people around the world. All of us, no matter where we are impacted by oceans. And that's why finding ways to be conserving them, to managing them effectively and restoring them is something that all of us should, certainly have an interest in supporting.
And I think that's been part of my conservation journey more recently. Of course, we think of forests as big carbon sinks and also producers of oxygen, but actually it's the oceans that are the largest producer of oxygen and also the biggest carbon sink and the heat sink. If we lose that buffer that the ocean provides, of course, we're in deep doo-doo with the global warming crisis. Can you speak to that a little bit and talk a little bit about how the oceans are essentially the biggest carbon sink? Of course, we can talk about blue carbon, which has become the sort of big buzzword this year.
Yeah. So, just big picture, when we think about oceans and climate, it really, these are systems that are very dynamic and have, influence over the other. For example, the oceans help manage the temperature of the planet by both absorbing some of the temperature and helping moderate some of the impacts that humans are having on oceans. And yet there's also this tipping point, right? So there's only so much that the oceans can sort of be buffering the damage that human-caused climate change and other impacts are having. But it is an important modifier. Some of the work that we're doing in the ocean climate interface, really it comes down to a couple of key different opportunities that we've identified. The first is really working with coastal communities and helping them plan and adapt for the changing climate that we're all facing right now. And that's using things like nature-based solutions, like restoring habitats that protect from storms and flooding. We're also working to try and identify the coral reefs that are most climate resilient, because we know that having intact coral reefs, which, there's a small portion of the ocean from a footprint standpoint, but, they're home to about 25% of all marine species on the planet. And, what I'm saying is that there could be no more coral reefs by the time that I may look to retire. My approach right now is not on my watch. Is that going to happen? And so working to identify those most climate resilient corals so that we can be helping ensure their, not just their existence, but that they're thriving so that they're protected and restored in appropriate places is another one of the tools that we're using to try and work in that ocean and climate interface. And then the next one, of course, was you already mentioned, blue carbon. And we're working a little bit of a pivot on some of the standard blue carbon approaches. So we know that, mangroves can be able to help sequester carbon at a rate that's far greater than even terrestrial forests. But what I'm excited about is it's not just that mitigation property that mangroves and seagrasses and coastal wetlands generally have, but they also have the ability to actually, create additional resilience and to help communities beyond the mitigation. So they can help communities from flood reduction risk, for example. And so we've been able to develop the first of its kind blue carbon resilience credits is what we call them, because we can both, be able to identify, quantify, and value the mitigation value of those coastal wetlands, but also the resilience value, which is so important for communities. And so if you can actually monetize both of those two different values, it's a way of trying to, better incentivize investments in blue carbon and the protection and restoration of those coastal wetlands.
Yeah, most people don't know that mangroves, as you say, are amazing at soaking up carbon and act as amazing barriers against storms. And it's the same with coral reefs. When you remove the coral reef, you're impacting the reef's ability to protect from storms. So it's very important that we try and restore these mangroves. Going back to carbon credits and this marketplace that's popped up for carbon trading, there's a lot of controversy that carbon credits and carbon trading actually allows companies to sort of greenwash. They're actually not actually doing anything actively to reduce their carbon. They're just buying up these credits. What's your take on this? Are carbon credits a way to mitigate global heating? Do you think there's a valid market there?
Yeah. So, I would break this down into sort of a couple different pieces. And one, obviously, we're not interested in supporting greenwashing or blue washing, as we call it in the ocean space. That's not something that I can get behind. Any of these efforts, when you take them to market, they need to have integrity. You need to be able to, appropriately verify, quantify, and, ensure that you've got an actual sort of sustainable product that can be appropriately used in the marketplace when you're taking it to the financial side. But I also look at the sort of general opportunity and need to be addressing mangroves, coastal wetlands, for example. This is one of the most, this is one of the habitat areas that we're losing the fastest in the world. We've already lost about half of the mangroves in coastal wetlands on the planet, and we need to ensure that there's protection and restoration of those areas. And so I try and sort of decouple both the challenges that there are using this particular market mechanism with the need that we have to ensure that we're coming up with better approaches that have integrity behind them, because these are systems that you can't just sort of throw your hands up and say, well, we're not going to be protecting coastal wetlands because there's been some bad carbon credits in the past. No, I mean, the opportunity is to ensure that you actually create these credits that work, credits that that companies buyers can actually know are, like I said, verifiable, that have integrity behind them, because we can't just turn a blind eye to the need to be protecting and restoring those coastal wetlands. So trying not to throw the baby out with the bathwater on coming up with better approaches is so important from my perspective.
The Nature Conservancy is not maybe the most famous environmental charity out there. It's maybe not as consumer focused as WWF per se. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what's different in TNC's approach to, say, some of the other major charities out there. Like when you say restoring these marine coastal communities, so you fundraise, and then how do you deploy the funds and so forth?
Yeah, so we are thrilled to be one of the largest environmental NGOs in the world. We work hand in glove and side by side, shoulder to shoulder, with whether it's WWF or other organizations, and we're proud to do that in various partnerships. The way that the Nature Conservancy works is not too different from any other. We're an organization that is science-based. We have about 10% of our staff are scientists, and that really drives how we think about the opportunities in the world to be, ensuring that people and nature are thriving. And at least in the ocean space, we have these incredibly ambitious goals to be really just changing how the world values nature, how the world values oceans, so that we can ensure the future for people and nature in any of these coastal areas, and the future of any of the ocean habitats that we're hoping to protect. Obviously, the Nature Conservancy works across all biomes, whether it's, terrestrial, freshwater, climate. We're a very, broad-based organization, but the work I do is specifically focused on oceans. And the way that we are engaging in the ocean space is really in three different areas. First is addressing the impacts of climate change. And I mentioned the work that we're doing there, working with, coastal communities on planning and adapting for, climate change using nature-based solutions, working on things like what we call super reefs, which is identifying, protecting, and restoring those climate resilient reefs. And we're also working in blue carbon on the blue carbon resilience credits, as I mentioned. But in addition to impacting the ocean climate interface or engaging in the ocean climate interface, we're also working in two other really important areas, supporting sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and then specifically the work that I do, that my team does, which is protecting, managing, and restoring ocean habitats. And that's where we're engaging in some of these innovative solutions, what we call our Blue Bonds for Ocean Conservation strategy, which is working with countries to refinance debt and bringing science and planning to the table to help countries protect 30% of their oceans. So that's one area. Another is, establishing new protected areas where there's critical habitats. So things like rebuilding lost reefs and reseeding mangroves and seagrasses and kelp forests. It's so essential so that we're not only looking at large-scale ocean protection and that durable financing, but we're also protecting and restoring the right places that are so essential for ocean health. And then finally, the other thing that we're engaging in depth is sharing the latest science through platforms, whether it's what we call our Reef Resilience Network or the Global Mangrove Watch, where we're partnering with many different organizations. WWF is one of them. And the Global Mangrove Watch and the Reef Resilience Network, for example, we're able to reach about 1 million people each year through those platforms so that there can be, more effective management of any of these coastal and marine habitats. So it's a broad range of activities that we're engaging in as an organization. But I'd say our secret sauce is the ability to be bringing these very innovative and paradigm-shifting approaches and coupling finance with science and being able to work with communities on the ground is the way that we as an organization are able to be very effective in whether it's ocean conservation or any of the other work that we're doing in terrestrial or freshwater biomes as well.
I was very lucky to have gone to the Nature Conservancy's Solomon Islands Marine Reserve, which was a fantastic experience. Do you dive? Are you a diver?
Of course. I don't think they would let you become an ocean conservation. In fact, oh my goodness.
Boulder.
Yeah, well, come on. Believe it or not, I'm going to throw out a factoid here that people might dispute, but I keep hearing that the per capita number of scuba divers in Colorado in the United States is higher than anywhere else within the United States, which is
That's a great factoid. I want to check that.
Yeah. At least people in Colorado use that factoid a lot. True or not?
Well, just outdoorsy nature lovers all go to Colorado.
That's it.
Yeah. But yeah, I had an amazing time down in the Solomon Islands. Really just fantastic to see how the Nature Conservancy is protecting this particular area. And then we're doing some coral reef surveys and diving undived sites. It was just one of the most magical places. But of course, the flip side was we see in these Pacific islands, these islands are disappearing because of the rising oceans faster than anywhere else in the world. And then, of course, the effects, beginning to see the signs of the effects of deep sea mining in that area. It's really tragic, not in the actual marine reserve, but in that area in the Pacific Ocean. So it's really, really amazing work that you do. But sometimes with the oceans, it's so large, it's very hard to do it all, isn't it? You can't monitor the whole ocean. So, I mean, obviously monitoring is key to protection. So how do you enforce these, biospheres or these marine reserves? How do you actually go about enforcing that pirates don't come in and steal fish or fish where they shouldn't? Surely it's one of the biggest problems that you face in marine conservation.
Yeah, it is. Ensuring that you've got that effective, sort of the effective protection in any of these areas is sort of the essential piece that doesn't get as much attention as it needs to, but it's something that we spend a lot of our resources trying to shore up. The best way to do that from our perspective is to be working very closely with communities and supporting them. Because at the end of the day, any of these protected areas, they need to be, number one, encompassing the needs of the people that live there. It's those communities that stand to benefit the most, but also often I at least have the initial concerns that the protected areas are going to leave them out because, historically conservation hasn't always been the most, community friendly, sector. And that's changed a lot. And certainly the approach that we have, you mentioned the Solomon Islands, there's so much work that we're doing with women's groups, empowering them as decision makers, as conservationists. The work that they're doing is dependent on the health of any of those natural systems. And so the ability for them to be decision makers, to be empowered to protect those resources helps them in the long term, with their own livelihoods. And it then also, helps to protect those natural systems as well. So as we're engaging on any of these protected areas, we need to ensure that there's durable financing, right? So that we're not creating paper parks in places. And we're helping governments have the tools that they need, financial resources, technological resources. We're also ensuring that there's science that's used to design those protected areas. But it's not science alone. It's science that's coupled with stakeholder engagement using processes like marine spatial planning to ensure that those stakeholders have a say in where those protected areas are and, how they're designed. So that those protected areas can really work for the communities, the various industries that are there. And then, finally, ensuring that you have that last piece, which is all of not just the regulations, but also the technology that's in place. And so we're partnering with other organizations that can help with things like using what's effectively military grade technology to help be able to monitor any of the protected areas and see what some of those activities are in those places. Because it's often not the people in the communities that are violating any of the regulations associated with the protection of it. It might be, offshore fleets that are coming in and fishing in areas that are otherwise closed. So need to make sure that the governments that are the ones at the end of the day needing to enforce any of those protected areas, that they have those resources.
And when you mention military-grade technology, you mean surveillance, satellite imagery, and
Absolutely.
so forth?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was kind of mind-blowing for me, both thinking about the scale. You mentioned sort of the magic of being down in the reefs. I mean, yes, that is mind-blowing when you sort of go under the water and see the kaleidoscopes of color, whether it's reefs or, any of the fish in areas, but then thinking not below, but looking above and realizing that there's this incredible technology that's being developed, and it's becoming more sophisticated on a day-by-day basis. And that's helping protect all of those things that are deep underwater by being able to have some surveillance of what any of the activities are on the water.
It's interesting you mentioned that. So I just interviewed Dr. Peter Fretwell, who's one of the British, one of the foremost penguin scientists in the world. And he was one of the pioneers of using satellites to discover penguin colonies on the Antarctic shelf, basically by spotting their poop. No one had thought about that before, but you can basically spot where the colonies are by seeing where the brown poop is on the ice. And he's discovered, I think, up to 30 colonies of penguins using that. So it's improved satellite technology. The more advanced it gets, the better the tools that you have at your disposal for monitoring, diversity, and also, as you say, monitoring bad actors. So I'm sure that space is only going to continue. How much citizen science is there in your activities? Do you use citizen science much, or citizen activities to bolster your efforts?
Yeah. So, at the scale I'm working at, global, it's a little bit less what I'm doing specifically, but like when you look at how the work touches the ground, which is, at the end of the day, how we're able to be effective, there's so many ways that you can be trying to activate, whether it's community members or just interested supporters that are wanting to be engaged. So the Nature Conservancy, as I mentioned, we're a science-driven organization. Science is so absolutely important for what we're able to accomplish in the conservation space. And, activating whether it's, youth or, individuals in any areas that are interested in protecting areas, helping with restoration projects. That's something that really is important in so many of the different locations that we're involved in. And I'm really excited to see that proliferate and grow in the various locations where the Nature Conservancy is. At this point, I think we're in about 58 different coastal countries, working either individually with our own team on the ground or working with partners. And so there's a lot of opportunities to engage really at that local level and bring in individuals and, excite the imagination, spark that inspiration, and be building that next generation of conservationists that's so important for the oceans.
And talking about building that next generation, we know that the Nature Conservancy partnered with Disney's Avatar 2 movie, The Way of Water, which I loved, and is incidentally just crossed the 2 billion mark at the box office. So well done, James Cameron. He can do no wrong. But please, have you seen the film?
I'm still waiting. I'm planning to take one of my nephews, so I've been holding off to do that yet, which has been difficult because I really want to go see it. But I'm excited.
You must see it.
Yeah, but from my perspective, I want to most see it when I'm with a 9-year-old that I know their mind's going to be blown because I'm really excited to see through not just my own eyes, but through the eyes of a kid. So that's going to be exciting for me.
I mean, I don't want to spoil the movie for you, but the way he recreates the ocean in this sort of new fantasy realm is just spectacular. I mean, obviously the CGI is second to none. But I think what's interesting with what the Nature Conservancy has done is that it actually, the partnership spotlights 10 different ocean species and allows users to create an avatar inspired by ocean creatures and to place it in the virtual world or the virtual Pandora Ocean. So, and then apparently for every creature created, Disney will donate $5 to the TNC to help TNC achieve the goal of protecting 10% of the oceans by 2030. So, Melissa, you should be going to watch the movie very soon.
I'm definitely going to go see the movie, but if you haven't yet made your avatar, that is so much fun. So, we are thrilled to be partnering with Disney. The Nature Conservancy and Disney actually have a long history of collaboration. So we've been working together on global initiatives to make a positive impact for the planet for many years, because we have, this shared understanding that it really is our collective efforts that are necessary to be creating a world where we can all thrive. And the particular partnership that we have with Avatar is where Disney and Avatar are supporting the Nature Conservancy just to protect our oceans. And as you mentioned, the way that we're doing it, it's highlighting 10 amazing animals and their habitats so that we can fully reflect the range and beauty that oceans, much like what you might see in Pandora, we can really sort of see how the oceans can bring us together. And I'm excited, a film like Avatar is a way for people who may not have had the opportunity to dive, to see what the oceans are truly like. And yes, it's, it may be fiction. It may not necessarily, we're not talking about a documentary here, but it's that same sort of amazement and magic that you see under the water. Experiencing in a film like Avatar is a way to just be connecting people to oceans in a way that we as an organization, as the Nature Conservancy can't alone do. And this is an opportunity for us to really be able to identify that, we need everyone to be a part of ocean conservation to, keep our oceans amazing is the campaign that we're working on with Disney and working with a partner that has the reach and the ability to make this visible to widespread audiences. It really helps us reach those audiences that we otherwise couldn't touch and help them to be, seeing ways that they can support the work for protecting our oceans. So we're really excited about this partnership, and I'm excited to see the film as well.
Yeah, exactly. Without spoiling it, but there's a scene about whale hunting in it, which is just the way that the director's done it. It's just heartbreaking, the way that he visualizes it. But anyway, I'm excited that you haven't seen it yet, so I'm sure we'll hear back from you when you have. But yeah, you must go and see it. But wow, what a film. Is there a particular species that you've dived with, or you have a favorite list of species when you dive?
Yeah, well, usually whatever's in front of me is my favorite. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm always amazed by coral reefs, and just seeing the beauty, the color, the diversity of reefs. I've was diving in Indonesia a number of years ago, and someone was describing it as an underwater acid trip. I mean, these are just the visuals that you can't, it's hard to actually, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's sort of the way that I think about it. It's like just such artistry underwater. But I have to say my favorites by far are probably dolphins. In particular, spinner dolphins, having the opportunity to see very playful species like that really just makes my day.
Oh yeah, spinner dolphins are something else. A bit of an obvious choice there, Melissa, but
Is it?
I'll let you get away with that one.
All
Dolphins are always everyone's favorite.
Yeah, I can't help it.
So just going into something a bit more technical, I know you mentioned blue bonds earlier, but I'd like to drill down a little bit about what makes blue bonds special vis-a-vis, say, green bonds. I mean, a lot of people have heard about green bonds. So maybe you can describe a little bit more in detail what the Blue Bonds program is about and why it's important.
Yeah, so let me just share a little bit more broadly. One of the key barriers that we see in ocean conservation across the board is financing. In general, there's a $700 billion funding gap to be supporting biodiversity around the world, and it's most acute in oceans. So one of the other things that we had realized was there were some consistent trend lines that we were seeing. Island and coastal countries, these are the countries that are at the front lines of climate threats. They were getting just battered year after year by storms and needing to rebuild and go into a lot of debt to be rebuilding and not able to invest in those climate smart futures, into the climate adaptation that would be needed. And so when we're talking with any of the government partners that we're working with, we were trying to identify, well, how can we take this thing that's such a challenge, this debt, and actually turn it into an opportunity? And that's what we've done with our Blue Bonds for Ocean Conservation strategy. At its core, it's really an opportunity for us to be able to work with governments to help them refinance their sovereign debt, and to do that in support of commitments for protecting about 30% of their ocean. The Nature Conservancy helps to do all of the refinancing, working with banks, working with development banks like the Inter-American Development Bank, or working with, for example, the U.S. Development Finance Corporation to de-risk that debt and do the refinancing that can unlock resources for ocean conservation. But it's not just about the financing. It's also about bringing the science and the planning and the opportunity to work with stakeholders to be designing those protected areas so that those protected areas can really serve the needs of the government and the people that live in the communities. So we're bringing the transaction, the finances, we're bringing the science and the planning, and we also create conservation trust funds or trust funds with each of these projects so that there's a platform that has integrity, it's transparent, it's independent from government, and that can be used to have all of the finances flow through in support of the conservation project. So it's those three key pillars, the transaction, the science and planning, and the conservation trust funds, are how these Blue Bonds projects come together. It's a little wonky, I'm not going to lie, but the opportunity that we see being able to work with governments with these kinds of debt solutions, it really is at the scale of the problems that we're seeing in the ocean and the scale of the solutions that are needed to ensure that the world can be meeting these, the global biodiversity framework's intent to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. This is one of the solutions to get there. It doesn't work everywhere, but we've seen in places like Seychelles, where we were able to complete a project in 2016, they've now been able to protect 30% of their ocean, which is about the size of Germany. It's enormous. So it's a way to really move the needle from a spatial standpoint. And second, we were able to work with Belize and refinance about $500 million of their debt. And that generated $180 million for ocean conservation in support of their commitments to protect 30% of their ocean. So it's just a game changer. There has never been an impact investment for the oceans of that size. We're really excited to see the scale of that. We then took the same sort of approach to Barbados and worked with the government in Barbados, which is, Prime Minister Mia Mottley is one of my sheroes, just an incredible leader on the ocean and climate space. And, being able to bring this as one of the solutions to help finance some of their ocean conservation goals is something that I'm just really proud we were able to help support. And we're now seeing those projects then get replicated in other places as well. We have a full pipeline of projects and hoping to soon close one of the next projects that we have in coastal Africa. We think that this strategy can be generating about 4 million square kilometers of ocean conservation.
Wow.
And about $1.6 billion in support of ocean finance. So again, it's one of the solutions out there. It's one that we're really proud to be able to bring an innovative approach. It's unusual for conservation organizations to be working with banks in the way that we are, but it's one of the ways that the Nature Conservancy is using our secret sauce of being able to put together innovative finance, science, and work with teams on the ground to achieve these large-scale ocean conservation solutions.
That's very impressive. But blue bonds aren't yet adopted as an industry standard, are they? It's still in a sort of nascent state as you sort of introduce it to the wider.
Yeah, well, let me just pull that apart. So we call the larger program blue bonds. There's also, an actual, what we would call, I'm using air quotes here for those who are listening, an actual blue bond, which are, new debt issuances in support of ocean, any sort of ocean conservation goals. There's a combination of those that are used in the debt financing that we do in all of the projects. And I mentioned Seychelles, Belize, and Barbados. The structures that we used in each one of those projects was really quite different. And so, again, I could go down the rabbit hole and get pretty wonky on the finance side of this. But I think I'll maybe suffice it to say that there's a number of emerging finance tools that we're seeing to support all kinds of environmental opportunities, whether it's climate, whether it's green bonds, blue bonds, which are supporting ocean conservation goals. These are certainly emerging, and we're excited to be at the forefront of some of this work and trying to do it in a way where there's just strong, again, integrity is the word I keep coming back to, where you've got the ability to very clearly be able to track the progress and the conservation outcomes that are associated with any of the transactions that we're engaged in at this point. Because that, to me, at the end of the day, is what's going to be so important if we're going to change the paradigm on how the, environmental, whether it's climate, oceans, what have you, is being protected. We need to make sure that there's that strong science and monitoring behind it so that we're not just greenwashing our way into a future.
Our Future Nature is brought to you today by Authentic Gallery. Authentic Gallery makes buying and collecting stunning and impactful art easy, with a high percentage of proceeds going towards our vetted partner charities. If you want to buy art and contribute to an impactful cause, well, check out Authentic Gallery. That's spelled AWETHENTIC gallery.com. As a special treat to my listeners, you can use the discount code OFNPOD. That's OFNPOD to get a 10% discount off all of my limited edition prints. So check out Authentic Gallery and start browsing now. Thanks very much. How does say a listener get involved with these kind of blue bonds, or is it only something for top financial institutions and banks? Is it something that the average person can donate to or get involved with? How does one learn more about the blue bonds?
Yeah, so if anyone's interested in learning more about the blue bonds, this is the specific strategy that I lead, and I'm so proud to do that. So just reach out to me. I'm easy to find. But what I would say is, from an investment standpoint, the work that we're doing in these projects, we're not at this point, working and sourcing any of the impact funds from individuals. We're working with banks on the refinancing of that. However, all of these projects that we're doing as the Nature Conservancy are supported by philanthropic resources. And we're so appreciative of the supporters that we have that fund our time to be able to put these transactions together and to be developing any of the marine planning that's needed for the project. So it's a really high leverage opportunity from a philanthropic standpoint. We put about anywhere between $2 to $5 million into developing these projects, and you can often be generating, whether it's 50 million, 150 million, or 200 million or more in support of conservation by doing these sorts of transactions. So very high leverage philanthropic support, and that's the way that we're able to work and have individual support is through that philanthropic support of the program and the time that we put into these projects to unlock the resources to support marine conservation.
So, Melissa, I mean, ocean conservation is such a huge issue. There's so many issues involved with it, and some depressing statistics. I mean, we have potentially coral reefs will all be gone by the end of the century. I've just learned that emperor penguins might be gone by the end of the century. Up to 40% of large marine species, it just the list goes on and on. How do you regenerate your sort of optimism on a daily basis? How do you cope with all this bad news? And when do you feel that sort of payoff? Like, what keeps you motivated in your job?
If I'm to answer this truthfully, which I will.
Well, truthfully is all we want.
Which I will. I mean, where I get my hope is being out in the natural world. And this is why I do conservation work. At my core, I'm a truth be told, like I'm a crazy mountain runner. It's like I'll go run across the Grand Canyon. That's how I connect. And whether, that's what I'm doing if I'm in the middle of the United States or if I'm on the coast, I get in the water and connect and sort of feel that nature is what I have to do personally. But intellectually, what gives me hope, which is I think what you're really asking me, is I talk to the people who are impacted and I see that they are so reliant on the natural resources that we are working to protect and that they are engaged in wanting to change the future for the next generation. That's what gives me hope is connecting, all around the world with the people. You mentioned Solomon Islands or, I was talking about Belize, wherever we go, talking with the people in the communities that are wanting to preserve these resources to me gives me such hope because they are the ones, not us, who are, really at the end of the day, the boots on the ground that are engaging to ensure that better future. And so whether it's sort of talking with those individuals on the ground or sort of seeing that there is this paradigm shift that's happening. I mentioned we work with large banks. I mean, 15 years ago, I would have never imagined that conversations I'm having with these really innovative financiers that are coming from whether it's Credit Suisse or, Deutsche Bank or, JP Morgan, like these people are actually very interested in seeing there be this shift and changing their own industries to be supporting climate and biodiversity goals. Like that didn't happen that long ago. And so these are the kinds of things, whether it's the individual level, the very tangible, just touching, seeing gives me hope, but then sort of taking that to that large scale and seeing that the world really is shifting and some of these institutions are moving to the right track. Now, is it enough? No. Do we need to do more? Absolutely. But I'm starting to see the building blocks get there for the future that I think all of us are, need, that we absolutely must see as a species for our own survival or for the survival of the penguins or the coral reefs that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the shift in the finance world to being a bit more aware and also putting the money where the mouth is and actually supporting these initiatives. So you have the triumvirate of, you have governments, supranational institutions, and charities like yourself. Let's talk a little bit about COP. So we just had COP27, which was in Egypt. No big carbon reduction targets were negotiated. And you had Coca-Cola as one of the sponsors. The next COP, COP28, the president or the hosting president is on the board of one of the largest petroleum companies in the world. Isn't that sending out the wrong message to the next generation of conservationists and sustainability advocates? What do you think about that?
I'm not going to argue it there that there's some mixed messages. And what I'll also say is we are seeing that there's a renewed interest on the part of industry in climate change. I think to me it's a bit of a mixed bag. We need industry. We need industry involved in these challenges. Like, no single sector can go this alone. I think to me, like that's the realization that I've come to you can take all the environmentalists in the world if they're just working, on the science and planning, and it's not enough, right? We need to actually have that paradigm shift happen. Let me also talk about the other COP that happened. There was also the COP15 in Montreal, the biodiversity COP. And what I saw there was just a tremendous amount of involvement also from industry, where they were saying, hey, look, we want targets. We want to actually be involved, and we want to have some certainty. We want to be part of the solution, but there's got to be a framework that we're working within. And so, again, it's not whether you've got industry involved, it's how, and is it in a way that that you're not greenwashing, that there's integrity, and that there's sort of a common understanding of how to be driving, whether it's shift in greenhouse gas reductions or, ensuring that you've got actually reliable targets that are associated with, science, that are crafting what any of the biodiversity protection goals are. So, it's certainly a complicated issue and one that I don't think that we can be exclusionary. I think it's sort of at the end of the day where I come down on these issues. And can we do better and ensure that there's not greenwashing and bluewashing? Absolutely. I think that's an imperative.
And what do you think of this space race? I mean, they often say that we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the ocean floor. Do we really need to go into space? I mean, I often think, well, why would you want to go into space? I mean, there's not much there. Sure, we have that gene in us to explore, but there's so much more to see and protect down here on Earth. But what's your viewpoint on the space exploration race?
I mean, again, I'm not gonna say that that we shouldn't be exploring space. I think that there's value to that. Sometimes the best way that we can actually understand our own planet is to go beyond it. I think there's a T.S. Eliot quote about that. Sometimes, the best way to understand where we are is to explore other areas, and there's science and learning that can be brought to bear for this planet as well. Is it where I would put my last dollar? Absolutely not. I think that we, that of course we're going to, as a species, need to be protecting our own planet for its own sake as well as ours. So I don't know. I'm not really going to weigh in on that one. But
if Elon Musk offered you a seat on his rocket, would you go?
I mean, again, you're talking to an adventure seeker. Like, I would absolutely want to see it. And, one of the things that you often hear is the way that it is such a humbling experience to really see all of our planet from afar, and the interdependency and the smallness of it, I think is something that we could all benefit from at some point.
Yeah. Just bringing it back down to Earth and the oceans. We talked a little bit about reefs earlier, but can we just focus a little bit on that? Because I know a lot of the work you do is very much focused on mangroves and reefs. And obviously reefs are hugely important to the health of our oceans. You recently teamed up with Stanford to identify and protect super reefs. For those of us who don't know what super reefs are, can you explain what they are?
Sure. So super reefs, they are not reefs that have a cape and fly through the air. Let me just dispel any rumors.
Unfortunately.
No, but then the Nature Conservancy has teamed up with Stanford University as well as the Woods Hole Institute, and the opportunity that we've centered on with those two institutions is to work together to collaborate to identify the world's most climate resilient coral reefs, and not just identify them. And we're using a lot of really, really heavy science and technology there, genomic sequencing, hydrodynamic modeling, identify where those reefs are. But then the next step is to be restoring them and protecting them. Because the idea is that, again, we know that reefs are in peril, and we may lose coral reefs by the end of the century if we're not protecting these climate resilient reefs. And so we're putting all of our effort into trying to identify those reefs that are best suited to warmer oceans, more acidic oceans, for example. And by ensuring that those reefs are actually propagated and protected into the future, there's a hope for having there be intact reefs over the long term. So again, it's a bright spot that we see in the coral reef world, and we're really excited to be partnering with such outstanding organizations and institutes like Stanford University and Woods Hole on super reefs.
And you've actually introduced an insurance policy for reefs, I believe, in the Mesoamerican reef in Quintana Roo in Mexico. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. Again, this is one of my favorite opportunities that the Nature Conservancy had gotten involved in. I mean, when you think about exciting coral reefs, what is the last thing you think about? It's probably insurance, right? But the reality is that we know that coral reefs are so important, not just from a habitat standpoint, but also because they are able to reduce the power of waves that come on shore. Okay? And this is one of those sort of like little known benefits. This is sort of the, reefs acting like Superman, the ability for reefs to be protecting those coastal communities. And so once we were able to put the science and the data together to understand and do the modeling on the ability for reefs to be able to diminish about 97% of the energy of a wave, we put 2 and 2 together and realized that there was an industry that was probably really interested in that. Because if you can protect coral reefs, and those reefs can protect the communities, when you think about places like Quintana Roo, Mexico, having those intact reefs means that you've got all of these, like the whole coastal communities, the whole tourism industry in that area. In Cancun can be better protected from flooding when there's hurricanes and other storms that may exist. So what we were able to do in Quintana Roo when we piloted this effort was we worked to develop the world's first of its kind insurance policy on the coral reef itself. So we're protecting the nature that's protecting us. And the way that it works is it's what's called a parametric insurance policy. So that and parametric just means that, instead of going in to have, your insurance adjuster go in and try and see if the coral reefs have been damaged, if there's wind speeds past a certain level, it automatically triggers the insurance policy. And then you might ask yourself, well, what does the insurance policy pay? How does this work? Well, the idea is that the insurance policy is used, once the payout happens, it's used to help do restoration on those reefs to ensure that those reefs are intact in the future and can protect again. So what we were able to do is just connect the dots. If the reefs are able to reduce flooding, the insurance industry wants to make sure that they can be reducing the risk to all of their insureds that they have on the coastline there. So the reef insurance, it helps the communities. It actually helps the insurers and protect some of the other businesses and people that they're insuring. And certainly it helps ensure that there's going to be those intact reefs over the long term. So it's one of these win-win-win solutions that, again, it's sort of like an unusual paradigm shift to think about the insurance industry building these policies that can be protecting coral reefs. But we're really excited that took off in Quintana Roo, was where we had initially piloted it. And then we've also issued another insurance policy in Hawaii. And we're excited to see that come to fruition, to take it to a whole different market in the United States. And then we're also in the process of developing insurance policies, not just for coral reefs, but also coastal wetlands, because those same protective values that coral reefs have, it's the same sort of protection that natural systems like coastal wetlands have as well. So if you protect those coastal wetlands, ensure that they're restored, they can then be providing that protective value to any of the coastal communities as well. So it's an opportunity we want to see really grow. And, we're excited to be partnering with various, insurance industry leaders in this space.
Doesn't this point to something a little bit deeper, where actually the only way we're going to protect the oceans is to assign it the same rights as a living being, as a human being? So, for example, the New Zealand government, I believe, 2017, assigned a particular river the same rights as a human. So if you harm that river, you're harming a human, and you can be legally punished for that. Do you think we'll ever get to that stage where we can treat the ocean as a legal entity unto itself?
It's interesting that you asked from a legal standpoint. I mean, I think more about the cultural understanding. Many of the indigenous peoples that we work with, they already see it as that. They don't see it as being outside of us. And so I would say it's not something that we necessarily would aspire to in the future, but it's something that many peoples already do. And working to support the efforts that they have had over millennia in their culture is something that we're engaging in, because those sorts of knowledge, different ways of knowing and being are something that I think we could all be learning from and be, building on and incorporating in other places where that may not, at least from a structural legal perspective, be, as visible as we need it to be. But yeah, I mean, I love the idea. I mean, conceptually, it makes sense from my Western mind. And I think it's not something new. It's something actually that's very old. And we need to be honoring that and helping support that.
But without a legal framework, you're not going to be able to prosecute the bad actors. I guess that's the problem. If you treat it as just a cultural concept, it's hard to protect it from being destroyed. Where if it's legally protected, then you could technically fine or punish the bad actors, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of ways that you can ensure compliance, right? You can incentivize it. You can penalize it. There's multiple different ways, and that certainly is one, to create that legal structure. Or like I said, there's ways to be just sort of supporting the conceptual frameworks and ensuring that there's resources there for those communities that are already doing the right thing.
So we talked about the blue loans, and we've talked about reefs. You can't talk about ocean health without talking about commercial fishing. Mm-hmm. And I believe TNC initiated a partnership with the Marshall Islands recently to transform the global canned tuna supply chain. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's a positive thing for fishing communities and the global supply chain of tuna?
Yeah, so this is something I'm so excited our fisheries team has been working on. It's what we call the Pacific Island tuna. And it's a Nature Conservancy, Republic of Marshall Islands joint venture. And we were able to put together a company that's supplying sustainable canned tuna to Walmart stores across the world. It focused initially on the United States. And the partnership, it's going to be positively impacting the health of the oceans, but also the communities and the customers that are depending on the oceans. Because what we know is that tuna in particular, they're environmentally and economically and culturally important species for almost all of the Pacific Island nations. But it's those countries whose water are really at the heart of the global tuna fisheries that have historically been excluded from enjoying the full economic returns of those natural resources. And so the business model that we're working on, it's a vertically integrated system that is positioning Pacific Islanders to be participating in a really equitable way in that global tuna supply chain. And the intent for these projects is to be directing 100% of the long-term profits back to Pacific Island governments and communities. And the model that we had created, it includes really strict sourcing standards and also ensuring that there's robust social and environmental sustainability commitments and best-in-class verification. So the idea is that it's going to be both benefiting people and planet. And so, again, really excited just to see this as being a way to ensure that there's resources that are going back to those communities that are, protecting those resources and that are so reliant on them, both from an economic and cultural standpoint. I mean, the tuna, the global canned tuna market, I think the number is it's about a $26 billion industry. And what we're doing is just ensuring that the Pacific Island nations really have the ability to engage fully in a global supply chains that they may otherwise have been excluded from just by virtue of their size. So it's definitely a game changer, and ensuring that the people who have the challenge of being negatively impacted by overfishing actually can change the whole approach, the whole narrative, and ensure that you've got those best practices in place, and then have those resources go back to protecting the areas and the communities where the Pacific Islanders are living.
Well, Melissa, you've done so much amazing work in your career. For those who are interested in getting into conservation who may not have any particular route to conservation, what would you recommend they do?
Get involved. There's so many different ways and threads in which one could be involved in conservation. And again, conservation is just such a wide field. I mean, I'm so privileged to be able to work in ocean conservation, but the world needs conservationists, it needs climate champions. It needs people that are working at all angles. And I used to tell people, that get a background in science. But it's not just about science anymore, as we've talked about today. It's also about finance. It's about law. It's about, economics. It's about understanding social and cultural issues. And so I think that there's so many ways that you can bring the knowledge and passion that you may have in any particular sector and bring it to bear on addressing some of the, whether it's the dual crisis of climate change and biodiversity loss or other challenges that we face. That's what I see as just a tremendous opportunity, no matter where you are and no matter what your passion is. There's a way to bring it to bear to really have a positive impact in the world. And keep up the hope. That to me is the most important thing, because there are those glimmers of hope. There are those ways of taking these diverse approaches and making that real change in the world. And I encourage all of us to become conservationists, because I think that there's a role that each and every one of us has to play.
And just to finish off, we hear about all the bad news all the time. Can you list out, say, top 3 positive news stories of the last year that you can be proud of, or that you think will instill a bit of hope?
I do have a lot of hope coming out of Montreal. So I was at the biodiversity COP in Montreal, and seeing the world come together and be able to agree to protect 30% of our ocean, lands, and water, to me, gave me incredible hope. So that, at the meta level, is what gives me hope. But I have to say, the hope I also get is just working with people on the ground. I mentioned the Blue Bond project that we had done in Belize. It was the world's largest impact investment for ocean conservation. And the Nature Conservancy has been working in Belize for 30 years at this point. And what I'm saying is there be the confluence of projects like a Blue Bonds project that can generate $180 million in support of Belize's commitment to protect 30% of its ocean. But layered on top of that and, alongside it is work that's been happening for many years, working, for example, side by side with a women's seaweed farming cooperative, and having there be both these large scale solutions for finance, but also seeing how it can touch the ground and impact and benefit the lives of everyday people who are reliant on these resources, whose livelihoods and whose sense of place and culture depend upon it. Those are the kind of stories and experiences that I'm very excited to see come together, where you're layering finance, where you're layering, community cooperatives, where you're layering opportunities to be protecting resilient reefs in a place like Belize. The way that we can stack these varying intersecting solutions on top of each other, those are the kinds of things that really get me excited, because I think I mentioned before, there's no single solution for these enormous challenges that we have. I think it was Bill McKibben who said that you needed silver buckshot for climate change. And I think it's the same way for oceans, right? So it's like you need these global commitments like what we saw come out of Montreal, but you also need to have these threads come together to weave that new future for places like Belize or many of the other places where we're working. And those are the kinds of things that I get so excited about, to see these things come together.
I love your optimism, and thank you for the hope, Melissa. And thank you for all the wonderful work that you do at the TNC. So, I'm sorry. Just to finish off then, if anyone wants to work with the TNC, how do they get in touch? How do they reach you?
I'm pretty easily reachable, always on email. Find me at mgarvey@tnc.org. You can find me there, or I'm easily findable on our website as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for your time, Melissa. And yeah, hope we can be involved with some of your projects in the future, and keep up the great work. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to Our Future Nature. Please remember to like and subscribe to keep up with the latest episodes. And if you enjoyed the podcast, it'd be really helpful if you could take a few minutes to leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Please also follow us on Instagram and Threads at Our Future Nature Pod for behind the scenes and additional resources, or on X at OFN_podcast. That's OFN_podcast. You can find our social media pages on the podcast episode description. You can also follow me at Lee-Davies if you want to be updated on the work that I do in green entrepreneurship, advocacy, and conservation. And finally, Our Future Nature is powered by the team at Authentic Studio. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.